What's going on, guys? Billy here, and today I wanted to make a quick video on an accessory that DJI released for their Mavic 3. It's a wide-angle lens that attaches to the front of the camera that, of course, gives you a wider field of view. Now, this is not the first wide-angle lens that we've seen from DJI. If you remember, they made one for their Pocket 2 that attached to the camera by a magnet. It increased the 93-degree field of view, 20mm equivalent lens to 110 degrees, and a 15mm equivalent. Now, that wide-angle lens for the Pocket 2 came included with the Creator Combo and was also offered as a standalone accessory for an extra $50. But the Mavic 3 wide-angle lens, on the other hand, doesn't come included in any of the bundles. It is only a standalone accessory that you can purchase for $179, which is definitely more expensive. So what I want to do in today's video is share with you some example images captured here with this wide-angle lens on the Mavic 3, some photos and videos, and I also want to share with you some of my thoughts about using the wide-angle lens, because there are some things to consider if you're going to be thinking about purchasing this for your Mavic 3. Now, this wide-angle lens is a pretty hefty piece of glass that comes with its own little case for storage when you aren't using it. The mounting process is the same as attaching a ND filter to the front of the camera, so you have to remove the UV filter and lock the wide-angle lens into place. Because of the extra weight, the gimbal will fall forwards without the internal locks in place, but this won't affect the startup of the drone, and it won't cause the gimbal to falter in any way in the air when the drone is flying. Now, let's talk specs. This wide-angle lens introduces a 0.65 times zoom, if you will, which now gives the Mavic 3's main camera a 108-degree field of view with a 15.5mm equivalent focal length. This is noticeably wider than the 84-degree field of view with a 24mm equivalent focal length that the camera has with no lens attached. Now, before we move on, I do just want to reiterate the fact that even though you are adding on some extra weight to the front of the Mavic 3's camera here, it's not going to affect the gimbal performance whatsoever. So as you're flying around, the gimbal will perform perfectly. It's going to keep the camera nice and stable. There's no twitching, there's no drooping, there's no anything. It still performs just as good as if you were flying without the wide-angle lens attached to the front of the camera. Now, probably the most important thing that people are here for is example photos and videos taken here with the wide-angle lens. So I'm going to share some of those with you, as well as some photos and videos taken without the wide-angle lens attached, so that you can get a feel for like the difference in terms of field of view. And you can also check out the sharpness to see if it is all suitable for your needs. I know a lot of people are going to want to do some pixel peeping, so I'll leave some examples down in the description through a Dropbox link. You can just download them onto your computer. And yeah, from there, I'm going to shut up. I'll let you guys just listen to some music and see some example images, and I'll catch up with you afterwards. Okay, so after having seen some example images taken from the Mavic 3's camera, both with the wide-angle lens attached and without the wide-angle lens attached, what are your thoughts? You're probably thinking, yeah, sure, it's a wider angle lens. It gives you the ability to fit more in the frame, but what comes as a trade-off to using this lens? Like, what are some of the downsides to putting it on your Mavic 3's camera? Because it's not all good. I've counted 8 different downsides, 8 different trade-offs that come as a result of using this wide-angle lens that really challenges the idea of even wanting to use it on my drone. So we'll quickly fire through all 8 of them here. First of all, it's just not as sharp. I mean, flat out, the photos and videos coming from this drone, from this camera, when having the wide-angle lens attached, are not as sharp as they would be if you weren't using the wide-angle lens. So if you have all this room to fly around and, fly further away from your subject to fit everything in the frame, it's like, why even use the wide-angle lens? If you post these to social media, the photos and videos, if you post them to social media, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, you're probably not going to see that difference in quality, they're going to be perfectly fine for posting. But if you pixel peep, you bring them into your editing software, you really blow them up, you'll see that the images captured from the wide angle lens, both the photos and videos, are just not as sharp as they look if they came straight out of the camera. Now, I'm sure that you guys didn't miss this one. There is a good amount of distortion that comes from the Mavic 3's camera as a result of using that wide angle lens. It was primarily noticeable to me when shooting photographs, specifically of like the horizon. So you could see that there's sort of like this bowing going on because of the distortion of the lens. Also, when shooting straight down with the gimbal pitched down to -90 degrees, you'll notice that like the land on the outside of the frame looks warped and distorted. Now, I really didn't see all that much distortion when shooting video, I would say, because when shooting photos, you get the full focal length of the camera. But yeah, there definitely is a good amount of distortion that can be fixed. Yes, in post through Lightroom, you can adjust that distortion, make little changes here and there. You can almost create your own custom profile when shooting with the wide angle lens, but it's definitely something to point out. Now, moving on to the third issue, the third trade-off here on my list, you can't use ND filters and the wide angle lens together because the wide angle lens attaches in the same way that the ND filter does to the front of the camera, so you've got to choose one or the other. Now, the good thing is we can adjust our aperture all the way up to f11, and then we can kind of change our shutter speed from there for when shooting video, but just know you can't use the wide angle lens and an ND filter together. It's one or the other. Moving on here, the fourth thing on my list, there's even more of a jarring change between the main camera and the telephoto camera when using the Explorer mode or the zoom function. So because we now have a wider field of view, jumping from say 6.9x to 7x, jumping to that brand new camera, there's even more of a jarring change, just something I figured I'd throw in there. Now, moving along down our list here, the next trade-off that comes as a result of using the wide angle lens is that hyperlapse mode is deactivated. In fact, inside of the software, when trying to activate hyperlapse mode, it straight up says wide angle lens attached, hyperlapse mode unavailable, or hyperlapse mode deactivated, whatever that language is. But it's just interesting that the drone knows when the wide angle lens is attached and it won't let you use hyperlapse mode. So take that for what it is. Just know that hyperlapse mode is deactivated. I don't know why they would do that, but it is what it is. Now, as a result of the drone knowing when the wide angle lens is attached, this one is a little bit out there and it's a little bit strange. You really have to fly the drone with the wide angle lens attached to know. But like the flight characteristics of the drone change. The speed is the same, the range is the same, the flight time is the same, but I just noticed that when flying the drone around, it seems to change the flight characteristics and tune the drone a little bit differently. Like the end point when you're stopping or the break point seems to slow down a little bit. It's strange. You just have to like fly the drone with the wide angle lens to kind of see what I'm feeling. But I noticed that because you have this wider field of view and they don't want the props or they don't want the body of the drone in the shot, they kind of seem to change the flight characteristics. Again, I can't really show it to you, but it's just something you've got to know happens when you add the wide angle lens onto the front here. And as for the final two, I just mentioned props and legs and stuff in the shot. Both of those happen. I've noticed that when flying this drone, when shooting video, there are props that kind of sneak in on the left and right side of the frame. And when you're shooting photos, if you're looking directly straight down with the wide field of view with the wide angle lens, the legs actually kick into the frame when braking with the drone. Now, is this a deal breaker? No, because we're shooting photos, but it's just something I figured that I'd mention. So with a list of trade-offs and downsides, and quite honestly, straight up problems that come as a result of using this wide angle lens, who's buying it? And if someone does buy it, how are they making use of it? Because let's be real here, a wide angle lens isn't all that much helpful in a drone. Think about how flexible these are when they're in the air. They move in 3 dimensions. You can fly higher, you can fly further, you can move around in any direction you want to fit the subject in the frame. These are things you couldn't originally do when you're on the ground. There's obstacles, there's things in the way. You might need a wide angle lens for this specific shot, but now you have a drone that can fly further back away to fit the subject in your frame. So like, why do you need a wide angle lens? Really, I can only think of 2 use cases specifically to how I would use it. So sometimes I shoot top-down photos of properties that I'm photographing, like for real estate, for construction. And I notice that sometimes at my 400-foot limit, I can't fit the entire property inside of the frame. So having a wide-angle lens would be nice in that situation, but then I'd have to deal with like the massive distortion and I'd have to correct that. But again, it does get the job done. It allows you to fit more in the frame for those top-down images. And then in those scenarios where you just have tightly spaced objects and you're trying to fly through them to capture a subject, it gives you more room to fill the frame. Take this home, for example. Now, these were captured with the Air 2S, but I vividly remember struggling to capture the front of this home, both the photos and video, because of how close the front wall and trees were to the actual structure itself. I don't think that this shot looks bad by any means, but it might have looked a little bit better with more space around the home, thus the wide-angle lens would have helped out a lot. So after all is said and done, after we've now laid out all the information on the table, what are your thoughts on the wide-angle lens here for the Mavic 3? For myself, I'm honestly happy that I purchased it. It's going to be good to keep inside of my bag for those scenarios where I have the tight spaces that I need to fly in and I need to capture more in the frame. So it's going to be good for like that one and only scenario. But other than that, if I've got to shoot a really big building, I'm just flying higher and further away in order to do so. Let me know what you guys think down below. Pretty expensive, $180, but I do think that it does have its use cases, but it comes with its trade-offs. Anyway, hope you enjoyed the video, and as always, I'll talk to you later. Peace.